Hello again, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Can You Hear Me podcast. I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications.
And I'm Eileen, Rochford, CEO of the Harbinger Group. We're a marketing and strategy firm. So here on Can You Hear Me, we're always looking for ways for executives to be better communicators. And today's topic addresses one of the issues leaders face: how to ask better questions. That means the questions you're asking your team to ensure everyone is on the same page regarding whatever area of the business those team members are in charge of.
That's right, Eileen. And in doing research for this topic, we relied heavily upon an article in the May-June 2024 issue of the Harvard Business Review entitled "The Art of Asking Smarter Questions" by three professors at IMD Business School in Lausanne, Switzerland, Arnaud Chevalier, Frederic Dalsas, and Jean-Louis Barsu. They discuss 5 techniques used to ask those smarter questions and highlight some executives already employing that method.
Absolutely. So we'll go through a bunch of the stuff that those incredibly intelligent people had to say coming out of their research. One interesting point made by the CEO of chipmaker NVIDIA, Jensen Huang, talking about his changing leadership style. He said, quote, "I probably give fewer answers and ask a lot more questions. It's almost impossible for me to go through a day, or it's almost possible to go through a day and do nothing but ask questions." Can you imagine?
Can you imagine everybody's looking at the boss and saying, what are he or she going to, share with us today? And they're just chipping away and asking questions. But, that really makes sense, Eileen, because, we talk about engaging with clients and we've said it time and again here, and it's related a little bit in the fact that, you go into a meeting and you're asking a lot of questions. You don't have the solutions yet, but you need to get the proper context of what's going on and the most important things you need to know as a leader. Don't you agree?
I do. And I think in a consultative setting, like the ones that, where you and I live and operate, it's a little easier to understand that and to apply, making the shift. In a more traditional corporate or organizational setting, it's a little harder for me to wrap my head around that, particularly because almost the ego of leadership and the idea that you're supposed to be the one giving the instructions, not asking, for feedback or input. It's a little harder to kind of just make the shift mentally. In as significant a way as the CEO of chipmaker NVIDIA described, literally going through a day without doing anything but asking questions. That's just a radically different approach to leadership than I think what we've been accustomed to. I
agree, but I think as I said earlier, it's going to give you some context to coming up with the right answer if you're asking everybody the questions that are most important to you.
Sure. One thing that I wanted to observe is I read in a few different places explanations of the value of questions, period, just in our lives, whether interpersonal relationships or our working relationships. The value of questions is really high because think about it. When you're encouraging feedback, you're encouraging a reciprocal conversation, which is really what question asking is. You're fostering collaboration and enabling, the development and maybe strengthening of bonds, between the people on your team, the people, in another department who can help you out, that kind of thing. It also fosters, if you think about it, forming of new perspectives, just insights that you never would have had if you hadn't had the courage to ask or the curiosity, to ask. So there's a lot about what makes question asking, period, before we even go into more of what the HBR article and research discovered. It's the idea that question asking is the foundation of critical thinking. If you don't get in the habit of asking questions, then how can you analyze? How can you grow? How can you evolve, right? That's really what critical thinking enables. So I just wanted to lay that little context for everybody, because it's not just this research. It's think about the role of question asking in how you get things done in any position, in any organization. How do you get to new ideas? Because you explore. And what's the tool to exploration in language? It's questions.
That's a really great point, because you just tied critical thinking and asking questions together, and they're completely related. And I just think that's a very important point to raise.
Yeah.
So another facet of this discussion that we're talking about today revolves around AI. Of course it does. We can't get away from it. We love it. We always go toward the AI light, don't we, Eileen?
Yes, we do.
The premise being, before coming up with answers, that was key, right? Now coming up with the right questions is central because, as you know, and a lot of people who use AI know, the better the prompts are in AI asking the questions, the better information you're going to get on the back end. And Eileen, in our multiple episodes on AI, and there have been many, we discussed how inputting the most detailed, correct information into your generative AI platform of choice gets you better results on the back end. And now we're talking about questions. So the thing is, you input information, but the more accurate, the more detailed it is. That's another reason that people are raising the specter of asking better questions. And it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. It does, for sure. There's an entire field emerging, and colleges are kind of scrambling to catch up in terms of offering the right degree, so that people can walk into that. To be a prompt creator for generative AI is a whole new field that's exploding. People can't fill the roles fast enough. So that gets back to the importance of critical thinking, analysis, exploration. That's how you do it. You have to be curious and try different questions. But one of the things that I'm dying to do is set a day and say, I'm going to do nothing today other than ask questions. Wouldn't that be so fun?
That would be so fun.
You might be a little annoying, though, don't you think?
But also annoying to everybody that's answering them, right?
Right.
But I think, but as it relates to the AI piece that we're just talking about, I think it'd be interesting just to sit there and just to tinker around with it, on that day that you're just going to ask questions, but also spending a little time with your AI platform and figuring out what elicits better answers, what questions, how are they framed? Yeah. How are they framed so that you get more detailed information on the back end? To me, that would be interesting. I'm sure I won't have time.
Oh, for sure.
That would be so much fun to get to do that and say, oh, that doesn't work. Or, oh, this works. And that's critical thinking. That's being a lifelong learner and wanting to know more.
And it's analysis, right? To evaluate, here's the quality of the response that I got when I used this approach. But I tweaked the approach and here's what came back instead. Yeah, it's fascinating. But when it comes to humans, you're going to get a different answer from every person you ask. Think about that.
That's true. Great point. Really great.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of fun though. Tracking that in a given day just to see.
No doubt.
I'm going to ask, and then I'm not going to tell, and I'm just going to ask them individually, one-on-one, see what everybody says and kind of compare and contrast. Again, reinforcing the creativity of just us, the old-fashioned version, model one, human.
I love it. Yeah.
The original intelligence. That's us for sure. So according to this article, we should get back to it because, of course, it'll be in the show notes. Tons of great stuff in here. Let's getting to asking better questions according to the HBR research and piece. It's divided into 5 areas. So the first is investigative. This may sound simple, but it is asking essentially the why and the how type of questions. You've got to ask both the why and the how questions. Because if the basic questions get overlooked, you don't stand a chance of solving, however complex your problem may be. You just can't. In this article, this is the thing that really stood out to me, Rob. This idea of in succession, asking over and over and over. Why? To get deeper and deeper. And one of the folks in this article talked about the biggest mistake is failing to go deep enough. Yeah. And I pondered that. Can you imagine, every time you get a response to something, so you're trying to solve anything at work amongst your team, and various people give their ideas, and you just keep asking, well, why that approach? Essentially, tell me more. And they go another level down. And
it does feel like, like asking why and how. But to your point about not going deep enough, if you don't go deep enough and you're sitting there on the surface, you're never going to really solve the more complex portions of the questions that you're asking.
So every time you're starting with why, which is classic, and you get an input from whoever, ask why again to their answer. And then based on whatever they say, ask why again and again. This is going to get kind of irritating, I warn you. But it's totally worth it. And there's probably different ways that, we could phrase that why, but it's the essence of continuing to ask why, because you're going to get this level of conclusion, new idea that you never could have reached if you didn't keep asking why. I think it's the greatest tool that helps us identify and analyze truly in the deepest way. So that start with why concept is one of your best approaches here.
Yeah, and they gave a great example in the article about a Spanish train manufacturer that ordered back in 2021 31 state-of-the-art commuter trains, but they ordered them too big to pass through tunnels in mountainous areas that they were going to be serving. So the problem was detected before the trains were built, thank goodness, but the delivery was significantly delayed only because somebody didn't ask the questions. Very simply, are those trains going to fit in those tunnels? And it seems so basic because that's such a basic part of that industry, right? Like that's the most basic, like I'm not a subject matter expert in there. And even I would say, yeah, you want to make sure they're not too big to fit through the tunnels. Somebody forgot to ask the question. It wasn't catastrophic in any way, thank goodness, but it was a blemish for sure.
And an example of how to pose that question would have been, why do we know these trains will fit?
Right.
Show me.
Or how, how are the specs going to measure up with the actual tunnel size? Something really basic. So people may be sitting here listening to this going like, duh, but we're showing you, we're illustrating to you that somebody didn't do that. And that's why it's very important.
Yeah. And I think in the article, there was another example that showed a situation where they didn't get it in time, similarly in the same industry, and what a literally catastrophic outcome that had. So I think we're underscoring the importance of reading this piece, but let's continue to draw out the other elements that were revealed.
First one's investigative, as you mentioned. Second one is speculative. So that is, in essence, asking the what if question. By reframing the issue and coming up with more creative solutions, you are challenging your team to think, outside the box. Great idea. So what if this happened? So you're speculating, and you don't want to go too far down the road on speculating, but you do in the spirit of looking around corners, which is what I think we do a lot in our business. Like what if this happens? What will our response be? What will our response be then? I feel like the speculative piece is so vital because I feel like that is what I try to do for my clients all the time. Well, what if somebody answers that question? What's your response going to be? What's your action going to be if people don't respond to, say, a product or a service offering the way you thought they were? Absolutely. Are you prepared for it? That's really what we're talking about here.
Yes. And then the third point of discussion is the productive question. So the answer or the example that was given is asking, now what? So now what? What happens next? By asking such things as, how can we get it done? And how will we measure progress? How will we know we're reaching that goal? How will we know we're on our way to getting there? You'll learn to identify progress as well as barriers. Because think about it, in that whole conversation, as you continue to kind of slice deeper, those barriers will come up. They can't help but come up. So doing all that's going to keep your team on task. It's also going to just lead to solving things before they may happen. That productive question. I had an interesting situation with a client today where a chief transformation officer, it's a role you're starting to see more and more of in all kinds of organizations, said that the framework that they operate within is ask, listen, relationships. So essentially asking, which is what we're talking about here, listening to the responses and then acting on what you learn, and that deepens relationships, right? So that's kind of the whole foundation for this chief transformation officer, their entire approach to leading change in huge organizations in their past. But when I asked them, what's one of your favorite questions? I hate to tie anybody down to one thing. The answer was, what if? And then now what? Yeah. So that productive question is the category that, obviously her response fell into. And I thought, I'm going to mention that because productive questions, they may be the ones that contribute significantly, most significantly, even perhaps, to change.
And I think another point that's important to make here on the productive question piece is that you're also getting by. You said earlier you're going to keep your team on task, keep them on their toes, but you also want everyone. The reason asking questions in general is important, and asking this particular one, like what now? How are we going to measure progress? How do we get it done? Is everybody's buying into it? So all of a sudden you own it. Last thing you want to do is is going around to everybody saying we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and then all of a sudden, if there's no unanimity or if there's no agreement or no collaboration, people are going to be like, well, I didn't have anything to do with that. You really want buy-in at every level. Yeah. You want your team not only to keep them on their toes, but it also challenges them. Be like, no, you're part of the solution. We're all part of the solution, not just me, not just you, all of us. And I think this one speaks to the ability to get that buy-in and to put people on the spot and to make them share, the best answers they can to your critical questions.
Mm-hmm. And I love that how will we measure progress question myself, because, in this business, we so often and should show against the ideas and strategies that, the creative ideas and strategy that we architect. There are goals, concrete, if you will, goals that can be achieved through marketing communications, and explaining those to clients and getting them to see, yeah, we can actually get there. Well, the only way that you can prove it is if you and your team keep going deeper and deeper. Anybody can come up with great ideas. I mean, truly, like we all have at least one in our lifetime, I like to think. But if you can't translate that into measurement and great, so show me what's it going to look like when we get there, and what are the steps along the way that lead up to, cumulatively or otherwise, that goal that we've set. So that's one of my very, very favorite questions to ask.
Oh, sure.
It's so challenging to an idea, and not in a negative way. It helps you realize, okay, it is a good idea, but until I break this down, it's never going to happen. So that's what measurement's all about.
Sure.
And I love it.
So this next type of question is the interpretive question, and it follows each one of the ones we've already discussed. So those are questions that make sense of what you're trying to accomplish. It helps you identify what the real problem is, and your process should always include the interpretive question, the convert of information you're seeking into converting it into something more actionable. So I'll give you an example. So let's say the investigative question is after an investigative question, you might ask, so what happens if this trend continues? After a speculative question, so what opportunities does this idea open up? And after a productive question, so what does that imply for scaling up or sequencing? So you can see interpretive is related to the fact that you've already asked some of these other questions, and it's your follow-up to whatever color you were receiving around, say, productive or an investigative, whatever the case was. And so I think it really makes a lot of sense in terms of this is by the time we get to interpretive, it's really the follow-up to the challenge that you laid out there for your team with other questions that are being asked.
Was there a favorite interpretive question included in the article by chance? I don't recall.
Well, what did we learn? How was that useful? Are these the right questions to ask? So there's a couple of, favorites there, I think.
What did we learn? That's I do use that frequently.
Yeah.
And
that's your interpretive.
And the debrief kind of experience with your team when things went well or when things didn't go so well.
Right.
In that case, you'd have the hard conversation. What did we learn from that? Not in when your parents said it to you. God, that was the worst.
Or what are we trying to achieve? It's like that seems simple, but then all of a sudden it's not if people are, equivocating.
Yeah. Yeah. What did we learn? That's going to be, I'm going to trot that out again. Because it's an
oldie but a goodie.
It is an oldie but a goodie. It's also one that you're in danger of becoming kind of annoying and sounding a little, so it's all in the delivery, folks. Remember that.
That's right.
Keep it friendly. Just think about it. If someone's
my interpretation of that question is that I was being entirely collaborative.
Yes, that's good. I like that. Okay, what did we learn?
Yeah.
Well, let's move on to the last type of question that was covered in this really thought-provoking research in the HBR article. So that's the subjective type of question. This means taking into account the human factor, which, if you think about it, the other four really don't do that.
Right.
Even if the solution to the problem is rooted in solid analysis, you come with all the data, you can prove it. If you ignore the subjective reactions of just regular old human beings, all of your work can be undermined. So don't create anything in a vacuum, I think is what this really means. Even if you have all the data you could possibly imagine that says, yes, this is going to work. Well, you better go check with typical humans and test the hypothesis. Ask them, how do you feel about this? Does this seem ethical to you? All kinds of different subjective questions could be utilized.
But it's
depending
really
on the situation.
It's the you, right? It's how do you feel about this decision? What aspect of this decision most concerns you? So we're going outside the analytical piece, as you mentioned, Eileen, and we're going to the human piece. And since human beings, even with the advent of AI, we all know how important human beings are, and all these big decisions being made at various levels of companies and businesses. It's you giving your human input, not relative necessarily to all the other questions that we were talking about earlier.
And I think it underscores the importance of talking directly with people who are in, say, for example, your target audience, your market, right? Mm-hmm. Never forgetting that going out and having live conversations with real human beings whom you want to serve with either through your mission or with your product, having conversations. They don't have to be formal. They don't have to be focus groups.
Sure.
But find as many opportunities as you possibly can to explore how is the work that you're doing with them or for them making them feel? Is it improving their lives? Is it hitting the marks that they expected of you? When they think of you, are their feelings positive? And getting them to tell you more about that.
Right.
I realized this year, I don't know why, I think I love remote work, don't get me wrong, but I do think that we've gotten away from having enough kind of air quotes, real conversations with the people who matter to us. And in our case, that's clients. So about a year ago, we instituted once a month in-person meetings that we go to the client as much time as they can possibly give us, even if it's just lunch. Doesn't have to be part of a weekly cadence of meetings, but we're in the same room together and we can look at each other and you can tell me really how you feel, and it's just kind of a break from the norm. I think creating those moments, you have to work to create those moments today. So getting that subjective feedback can really be best done in a small group, one-on-one, if you will.
Yeah.
In my opinion. But
I would say that a recent experience, we had a project that we're working on together and we're in the room with the client. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we were able to glean a lot more because we were there asking a lot of questions. We were in person. It was a safe space. And I just feel like it really worked out well. Do you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. And I will say, hat tip to the investigative journalism training, that's so ingrained in you is a big part of what made the conversation productive. So go ask more questions in this conversation is not real. This is about, you got to learn how to ask more questions and the types of questions to put in kind of your dialogue toolbox. And we've just gone through those different types, and I encourage everybody, we'll include this article in the show notes. Totally encourage everybody to read it in depth because there's so many more examples in here. Just want to get you thinking.
There's just a litany of just great information. I mean, we're scratching the surface here, and that article just has so much detailed information. Each section has a CEO that embodies that question that's being asked. And I really, the other thing I like that we did here is we talked about the subjective one where you're asking people their opinion, because the flip side, you have to balance the questions you're asking, and you don't always ask the easy questions. The hard ones are just as telling. But David Lowe of the pharmaceutical company Ipsen was quoted in the HBR article saying, quote, "If you start asking closed or loaded questions like, why have you done it like this? It can feel like a police interrogation. This creates an unsafe space, and unease spreads to the rest of the team," unquote. So we're giving you great examples of asking those questions. But here, as we're ending the podcast, we're giving you an example of what not to do, not putting people on the spot. So you're challenging your team, but you're not maybe second guessing them or putting them on the spot, because if everybody clams up, nothing's going to get done.
So the structure of your question and the tone of your question are very important. And let's just look at that example that you gave from David Lowe. He said, why have you done it like this? That can feel like an interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
Totally agree with David. What's another way that could be asked? I've often said, so walk me through your thought process. I just want to understand. How did you come to that conclusion? It's slightly more friendly. You're still asking essentially the same thing, but it is slightly more friendly. So structure and tone. I often like to just kind of, if this is true, I need to know, how'd you get there? How'd you get there? Like, bring me along, because I'm a little late in the game. I just want to get, kind of clarity on how did you guys make these decisions, or why even. But that process that you followed, walk me through it. And I don't mind being taken down the whole long, journey to get to that clarity.
But what is your answer going to be if they articulate it to your satisfaction? You're not putting them on the spot. You're just like, help me understand what you were thinking, not in a bad way.
How'd you get there?
let's say they acquit themselves well, and you're going to say something positive back to them, aren't you?
Yeah, for sure. Like that. Great. I really like the approach, and thanks for kind of catching me up. I think I have a bit more clarity. I've got a few more questions, and I'm not sure what the follow-up would be, but I more than likely would want to drill down, several layers more to get to like deep understanding.
It is not a gotcha question at all. No. That's the point we're trying to make. Don't ask questions the wrong way, but if you ask the question in that fashion, the way that you just articulated, that's not putting him on the spot. That's just saying, hey, take me along for the ride. And if the ride sounds reasonable, you're going to be like, sounds good, right?
Right. So we've drawn two key points here, I think. The first is be conscious of not being annoying, because asking why a million times can get a little irritating.
Oh my gosh. They just won't
really?
stop.
You're going to ask me why again? Shut up. Just kidding. So be conscious of that and try to find, maybe more creative ways of asking how and why.
Right.
And be super sensitive to the possibility of coming across as, you're interrogating someone and you want the answers now. Totally not what we're saying. So it is all in the structure and the tone even.
That requires EQ and self-awareness, which many good leaders possess. And I would hope that most of them
cultivate, really. I don't think anybody's given that.
No, they're not given that. No, you have to work at that. You have to work at that. No question.
Yeah.
No question.
Oh my gosh. I work at that every day.
No. Well, listen, you're the lifelong learner. You're the one that's so the job's never done. I always love
never
that.
done, Rob. You're so right.
I'm like, you know what, Eileen? If you're a lifelong learner, so am I. And it's I think
awesome. You're naturally a lifelong learner.
I know, but it made me think about it more, critically when you talked about it. But I think as we end this podcast, you mentioned it. We're going to include the article in the show notes, because there's so much more. If you're interested in this topic, there's so much more to glean from the article. And I think if this is your cup of tea, I think you'll really enjoy it. So that's going to do it another. I'm sorry.
I'll just mention one more thing. There were a couple other HBR articles actually that were slightly older that touched on different aspects of question asking and kind of the value of questions. I'll link those too. Just wanted to toss that in there. Rob.
No, that's fantastic. To me, HBR is such a great professional development resource, and I'm just fascinated whenever I get the magazine, because there's so much information that helps somebody like me or you come up with things that I wasn't thinking about, asking better questions. That's a really great way to think about it. I might not have thought about it had I not read the article. So
definitely.
That is going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson. If you would like to comment on the podcast or suggest a topic, we're always up for suggestions. Please contact us at our new Can You Hear Me podcast page on LinkedIn.
And I'm Eileen Rochford. Thanks everybody for listening again today. If you like this show, please consider just giving us a review on any of the platforms where you found Can You Hear Me, like Apple or Spotify. And because your reviews help other podcasters. Your reviews help other potential listeners find our show. Thank you.